But I just want to make sure there was no way of saying that she's going to invest today, even though she wants to.
I have my handbag along.
So those of you who brought executive summary, please turn that in to me, and we will take a look and also pass it on to her. That was just our way of trying to introduce you to the bigger places and the bigger networks. So I just wanted to note that. And thank you very much for being here.
Sure. I'm going to stand. I do have a really loud voice that I can use. In high school, I was the class valedictorian, but I was also the head football cheerleader. So I won't use that voice right now. How many people know what Procopio is, where we are today? How many people do not? Okay, I did not know until I got here, so it's probably a good thing to say a word to our sponsor. That Procopio is a law firm best known in Southern California that has a new location up here, starting to get new clients in the Bay Area, and they've been kind enough to host this event and the Women's Startup Lab. So thank you to them. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in the software industry for over 30 years. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, Farmington, Minnesota. I actually did belong to the local 4-H club. I don't know what that is. I won't say the pledge. I went to college at the University of St. Thomas. I'm a trustee there today. It has 12,000 students. It's in St. Paul, Minnesota. My first job was as a systems programmer at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. I have an undergraduate degree in math and business and minor in computer science and master's in international economics and education. That job lasted for 1 year because I was bored to tears. So I quit my job one day along with not having paid off all my student loans and started a software company the same year Microsoft did. Since the venture capital industry was only about 4 years old, this is called Silicon Valley, not Software Valley, so nobody was funding startups in software, let alone did they know what we were. I funded my company through profitability, which is still a hard route. The company was acquired in the mid-'80s, so two things happened. One is I had discovered by this time that winter was optional, and I also discovered that it was really expensive to move to the Bay Area, so I obtained 3 goals. I left winter, I moved to the Bay Area, and I sold my company. And then I co-founded Ann Winblad Venture Partners. We did our first investment in 1989. Our first company was a young software company. The CEO is named Heidi Reisen. And we've started 120 software companies since then. We always start at the A round, not C. And we've had $16 billion exits. So we've done quite well. We're investing in our 6th fund. We don't do seed investing. We start with the A round. A couple things I'd like to share with you today, but I'd like to sort of make sure I understand the audience. How many people are looking for capital or plan to look for capital in the next year for their businesses? How many people just want money for some reason? Raise your hand. You're not telling the truth. So Michelle doesn't need money. She's just got all the contacts in the world. So I've known Michelle for a long time through IBM. So she's recently left IBM. So if you want to know a great Rolodex, she has one. Anyway, about 2 weeks ago, I came back from, actually a week ago last Friday, I came back from a trip to the UK, to London, Edinburgh, and Cambridge. And Heidi Reisen called this the Spice Girls Tour. So it was Heidi Reisen, Wendy Lee, Karen White, and myself on a lecture tour. I told my younger sister, hey, we're calling ourselves the Spice Girls. And she says, who are you, Old Spice? So Heidi renamed us the Old Spice Girls Tour. We spoke to a lot of women, and it was interesting spending all my time here in Silicon Valley and primarily in the United States. We spoke to women at universities and prominent universities. We spoke to tech luncheons of women executives from IBM, Cisco, SAP, who were quite advanced in their careers. We spoke to a thing called Grow Geeks, where probably the average age was about 28. There were about 200 people there. And we spoke to 2 tech conferences where there were both men and women. And we had Q&As at all of these events. And there was really, when I think back at at the questions that were asked, they all involved one thing: risk. And as I think about it, really thinking about risk is not a smart thing. I'm sure many of you do think about risk, but I'm going to try to change what you think about if you really want to be a successful entrepreneur. And then we'll talk quickly about fundraising stages. So if you look up risk in a dictionary or anywhere else, it's kind of a scary word. It's a situation involving exposure to danger, the possibility that something unpleasant or unwelcome will happen, uncertainty, unpredictability, precariousness, instability, insecurity, perilousness are all synonyms for risk. When you say there's a certain amount of risk, you probably are saying there's a possibility of failure. There's a likelihood even of failure. There's a threat of failure. It's going to be menacing. It's not going to be safe. And the word impossibility comes to mind versus possibility. So I'll give you a good example. One academician who had done a lot of work in natural language in your space came over here and worked this summer for Nuance as part of their R&D group. And she is at the University of Edinburgh and secured a huge grant to commercialize some of her technology. So when she asked me a question about what should she do, she said, look, I love teaching. So what are my options so that I don't have to leave teaching and I can still commercialize this? I go, well, that's not really an option. And that was shocking to her. If I'd met the same academician at Stanford University, she would have probably said the following: look, I've got this grant to commercialize this technology. I found these two really smart undergrads. I'll advise these guys or girls, and will you fund that team? Because this is going to be the first company that spins out of here, not the last. It's very, very different. Now, do I have an interest in following up with that academician in Scotland? Absolutely not. Because that woman is thinking about one thing: risk. Would I have an interest in following up with a woman that said the second thing to me at Stanford? Absolutely. For a number of reasons. One is that she's moved out of risk into possibility. Now, I will tell you that, even the word risk taker, I looked up the risk taker on sort of news items about risk taker on Google the other day. And there's hundreds of articles about how to be a risk taker. From the Ladies' Home Journal to 17 Magazine to the Wall Street Journal itself. And they're actually all horrible articles, so don't read any of them. And in fact, there is even one particular article from the Columbia Business School, which basically has the 40 frequently asked questions in an interview for a position. And number 22 is, are you a risk taker? And in this thesis that they've written at Columbia Business School, they talk about how you should answer these questions, which I found hilarious. And on the risk taker one, they said, people don't really want you to be a risk taker, but they don't want you not to be a risk taker. So find something that's a middle ground answer. That is like the worst advice that I could possibly give. Now, if you look up venture capital in that same dictionary, and maybe we should throw dictionaries away because we don't actually know what they are anymore, we just know what search engines are. But it says venture capitalists and venture capitals, capital invested in a project in which there is a substantial element of risk, typically a new or expanding business. But I never think about that either. I think of myself as not a risk capitalist, but an opportunist. And I only fund visionaries. As an opportunist, I do believe in things like chance and luck, favorable outcomes, moments of time that are opportunities. And people even say that, opportunity means getting a new lease on life. It's your opportunity to move on. When I say I'm an opportunist, I'm in the business of new. This is also something that's really challenging for companies that pitch. I only invest in new things. Now, there could be ridiculous new things where, the outcome is zero. But I need to convince that there is a new opportunity, not a redone opportunity, not something that has all risk mitigated. That's why we don't talk about risk. Something that has a huge opportunity going forward. A lot of times when I get pitches from women, this is where the pitches fail, is they are so buttoned down of how you are going to handle risk that they forget to look at the large opportunity. The most successful entrepreneurs and most successful CEOs are the ones that keep their eye on that larger opportunity in the future while executing in the present. They're not the ones that execute perfectly in the present but don't have a large opportunity fields in their line of vision, even though the horizon is quite far ahead. So when you're perfecting your pitches here or anywhere else, getting every detail buttoned down suggests that you might be able to operate well, but you're not a visionary. That is how most entrepreneurs don't get funded. Other than, there's some really crazy ones. The craziest idea that was ever presented to me, it was at one of these, pitch events, and we all were assigned 5 people to hear pitches from, and it was a guy, not a girl, and he said, I can control networks of brainwaves. I said, oh, great. And I said, hey, how about a demo? He sat there quietly for a while, and then he said, I'll have to come back on a less cloudy day. Okay, we just do that. When you look up the word visionary, you also see words like inspired, imaginative, creative, inventive, enterprising. The word enterprising actually is only part of the definition of visionary. It has nothing to do with risk taker. And that's what we're building as enterprises. Insightful, perceptive, all the words that you would use to describe someone who has the ability to attract talent. One other thing to realize when you're auditioning in front of a venture capitalist is that we're thinking ahead about your ability to attract talent, especially here in Silicon Valley. Even if you may not be the CEO in 10 years, you're going to be running this thing at least for the immediate future. And it has never been more competitive for talent. When I was a young venture capitalist, now I've been a venture capitalist for 24 years, so I can't use this anymore as my thinking process. I used to think on the first couple of years, hey, when Heidi came and pitched, I thought, look, if I had to quit my job, would I go and work for Heidi? Yeah, I'd go work there. I have some other questions about Heidi's business, but I would go work there. That doesn't work for me anymore, but it works for my younger partners. And if we think you've got a great idea, but you will not be able to be competitive in the intense market for talent here, you will not get venture capital funding. We also look for, really, when you look, the key line in the word visionary is a person with original ideas about the future will or could be like. This is back to the business of new. We're not investing in something kind of new. We want something really new. The seed investors are different. They're in the business of, they don't necessarily need as big an opportunity because most of their returns will not come from the giant outcomes far in the future, but from smaller outcomes in near term. Product ideas. We're building companies, they might be building products. That's important to realize if you take seed investment, is that your seed investors might be coaching you how to build that product. And that might be exactly opposite of what you need to be focusing on if you're going to get A-round investment, where you have to build a real company of scale. You have an ability to imagine what a large opportunity would be like in the future. Sometimes the seed-funded companies have over-perfected themselves on a great product, but they can no longer articulate this big vision of the future. There's also an interesting thing if you go online and you say, okay, you know, what are some of these visionaries like? And there is one quiz online about visionaries. Don't ever take this quiz either. And at the end, they have, you know, at the end of describing these visionaries, they have, I noticed you had some quotes up in the back about, you know, from famous people and kind of mantras of, hey, this is inspiring, so we'll read that every once in a while. And they said that their top 5 visionaries were Christopher Columbus, Confucius, Albert Einstein, Bill Gates, and Jesus. So, but right after that was Buckminster Fuller. So, I must tell you my Buckminster Fuller story. So when I was a young entrepreneur, and Buckminster Fuller is long gone, he was in an airport, sitting there waiting for the same plane that I was going to be on. And I thought, wow, that's Buckminster Fuller, you know, Bucky Fuller. He seems like a genius guy, a math major, you know, I really want to meet this guy. And I was a little shy about going up to him, and I walked up to him and I said, hi, you know, you don't know me and I don't really know you, but I just wanted a chance to introduce myself and shake your hand because I have a lot of respect for you. It's been about, you know, in his 70s then. And he goes, hey, you're kind of a cute girl. Do you want to sit on my lap? Literally. And I said, no, I just know that wasn't what I had in mind. And so, anyway, what it means is anybody can be a visionary. If Buckminster Fuller can be a visionary, so can you. And he's number 5 on this list. So let's talk about investing here for a minute. You know, first I really want you to take seriously this thing about risk. If risk is always on your mind, you should not start a company. If risk is where your psyche takes you, and you are a risk taker versus a visionary, don't come and pitch to venture capitalists. You might get a nice little company off the ground, but you won't make it. The typical company that gets acquired today for any reasonable sum of money is 7 years old. 7 years of worrying about things, about dwelling in the risk words, it will really not make for a very pleasant life. 7 years of dwelling on a huge opportunity and obtaining it is very sensational. The typical company going public today is 10 years old. When we started our venture fund, we funded a little company called Hyperion, 2 guys. Typical company we fund has 2 to 10 people, and they went public in year 5. They had just finished a year of 26 million in revenues. Next year they did 60. Today we cannot take a software company public until they're leaning into $100 million of revenue. And $100 million of revenue is a lot more revenue than Hyperion had when they went public in 1995, because they had perpetual licensing. And this is SaaS revenue, so you only get some of the revenue to recognize. So 100 million is probably almost 200 million in 1995 dollars. So it is a long haul once you make the commitment to venture capitalists. So don't ask for it unless you really want to commit to that haul. This is the reason that you see a lot of founders go by the wayside, is they think that once they sort of start getting institutional money past their seed round, that things will go fast. They do go fast once you get to year 7 and look backwards, but during those 7 years they seem to go remarkably slow. So a bunch has changed since we started our venture fund. One is the professionalism of seed investing. And I'm a big proponent of seed investing. I would say 8 out of 10 companies that come into us have gotten seed investing. But they've gotten seed investing from professional seed investors, not the old-fashioned assortment. They have not been curated by anyone. They've been roughed up a bit by their investors. They've been pushed hard. The companies that got seed investing from professional investors, for example, if you got seed investing from Diane Green, who's a seed investor, every venture capitalist in this valley would take a meeting with you for the A round. Diane could be a venture capitalist anywhere, but she's a seed investor instead, and usually runs a company or two on the side. The companies that get that type of seed investing have worked hard at it. They've really determined, how do I get money from the right seed investors versus just money? That is, if you intend to build a large company. If you have a smaller company in mind, or a tightly controlled company in mind, money's money. At the end, if you can't get money from the best investors, and you absolutely need money to get money, money is money. When I started my company, we did an outside contract with the state of Minnesota, which I secured, to actually finance our business. But we needed another $25,000 to buy more computers. And although that sounds like a small amount of money, we were short $25,000. In Minneapolis, there were 10 major banks. And I thought, oh, a bank will lend me this money. I've got this contract. We're all smart developers. You know, I worked at the Federal Reserve Bank. I've got this great degree. So I was on bank number 9. And by this time, every bank had said no. In fact, I could actually know exactly when they would say no. So I went home and I practiced crying. Thought, you know, I'm going to get money from one of these guys. So at the 10th bank, right, as the guy started squirming in his chair and moving his papers around and not looking at me anymore, I started crying. And, you know, actually I think he would have given me $100,000 to get me out of the bank. But I got my $25,000 on an unsecured loan. At this point in time, you know, money was money, and I needed $25,000. So, you know, but aim high. You know, go talk to other companies who've gotten seed funding and gotten to the A round, and talk about how they got valuable seed investors. The A round is tougher. Last year, there were only about 1,000 companies, and that's pretty typical. There's only about 800 to 1,000 companies in the entire United States who get an A round of investment per year. So how many companies are represented in this room? It would be 30. So that's a noticeable percent, or 0.0 something of 1,000. So it's a very, very hard gauntlet to get through. At the same time, once you get the A round, what that means is, as A round investors, let's say we gave you $4 million, we have reserved money from our fund to keep you funded with your B round, your C round, your D round. So, you know, this is why they say there's an A round crunch, because people never count it. It's been the same number for 10 years. Sometimes it's 800, sometimes it's 1,000. But it's or 1,100, but it's not a large number. It's going to take some time. One of the things that we see people do is hand us their executive summaries. I'm not going to let anyone hand me their executive summary today. I'm not, other than Michelle, one other person in here. Well, Michelle,
I'm in PR. I'm a grad. Yeah, well, I know you.
I already asked how to work with you. So,
yeah.
But that's not what you do. Do you realize how many things we get over the transom that are pieces of, you know, text that have no persona behind them? What you really want to do is if you really think, we fund core software companies, direct-to-enterprise software companies, and analytics, and, you know, core plumbing stuff, and all the stuff that really requires that you would probably be able to patent something. I think that is sort of the starting line. Most of the companies we funded have picked a time to come into one of the partners and say, hey, I'm not really searching for my A round yet. I'm not pitching to you. In fact, I don't have a pitch deck. I'd just like to talk to you about what I'm doing and see if this is something that you'd like me to keep in touch with. I'd love your feedback at this time. You know, there's two things. One is, you may not like anyone in our firm, so you want to do this with a few people. You want to socialize yourself in Silicon Valley among the investors. You're very fortunate Those 1,000 companies, last year $29 billion was invested by venture capitalists. 50% of it never left the bank. Most of it is here. What a gift for you that you're located here. So step one, do not start sending stuff to venture capitalists and hoping that you're going to get, responses, feedback, or whatever. We don't invest in words, we invest in people. When we went out to raise our own first fund, people said, why would you start a fund based on software? Don't the assets walk out the door at night? Yes, they do. And the assets are you. So we want to get to know you. And if you've got seed money, you can say, look, my seed money runs out in X months, 9 months. So part of what you want to do during that seed funding period is pick a few venture capitalists. It may take you a month to get on a calendar, especially this time of year, and say, look, I'd love to do time for a coffee, a lunch, or whatever. I'd like to get your feedback. Do you think this is something that I should go for Series A? Who are the best firms? Maybe it's our firm. Maybe we recommend someone else's firm. So this is what the guys do. They're not sending us pieces of paper. They're barging in. They're in our lobbies. They're hanging out. And it is more frequent than not that women start handing me stuff. So I'm sorry to tell you that that is a no-no. But and also, if you hand me paper, you know where it's going to end up? I have a dog that sits in my back seat that loves eating paper. And occasionally, when I get things analog like paper, there's a chomp out of them. I don't have my dog in your car today, but you should send it electronically when you finally do send something. And then we'll tell you what we'd like to see, to remind us to keep in touch. You might even get, an introduction from us where we say, look, this is not from us, but here's a customer you should talk to. And by the way, as a seed-funded company, a customer is even more valuable than anything. So that's what you need to do during the seed round, orchestrate it. Don't just get any money, try to get the best money. Try to look at, where there have been seed syndicates. You can look at angel lists and see where the best syndicates are and aim for those people. You may have to personally go meet them as well. Spend the time during your seed round to socialize in Silicon Valley to meet venture capitalists. Meaning, send an email and say, hey, I'd love to get on your calendar. Don't be pushy because our calendars are busy. We consider we know how many deal shopping days we have left in 2013 at this point in time. Once you get your A round, the fun doesn't stop then. It's a pretty exciting time. To me, the most fun is when companies get their first round of real funding. We get to help you recruit more people. You actually can appear on the market map for the first time. You develop an industry persona, not just a working persona. You figure out immediately who you're going to compete with and partner with. You basically get knitted onto the broader software market map. That should be the goal of your A round, as well as to figure out how do you build a business model. It is amazing how many companies come to us for an A round and still show us a seed round pitch. And we're waiting, and we say, hey, how big can this be? Do you have any slide with numbers on it? And they say, well, we didn't bring that to this meeting. These are goal lines. We want to see how you think critically. Remember when you went to these liberal arts colleges and they said the goal of liberal arts college is to allow you to think critically? Well, this is the think critically part. Is how, numbers aren't your strategy. They tell you if you have a strategy that's worth quantifying and that you can set goals for. It sort of helps us figure out, where do we need to start sniffing around for talent for you, even ahead of the funding round you have today. B rounds are harder. Where there's 1,000 companies that get their A round, there's less that get their B round. And most people die, meaning don't achieve their full goal line. They get acquired, which is not necessarily death, could be a good thing. They get acquired or go away or merge with someone else between the A and B round. It's the toughest time. So So make sure that you set your goals with your venture capitalists of what do I have to accomplish with this money in order to get the next round. Set that in your head like concrete when you get your A round. It's amazing to me how many companies are sort of like, well, we're almost out of money, you know, we didn't really expect to get our B round this early. How could that possibly happen? It could only happen if the product didn't work, which is tragic in many respects, but in most cases, if the venture capitalists still believe in the market, the A-round investors will give you more money. But if it's because of poor planning and poor execution and not thinking ahead that you're actually going to need more, then probably the unfortunate liquidity event of just kind of disappearance from the market map will happen. You get past the B round, you're golden. All of our companies that have their their revenue mechanisms working, really got their B round and actually delivered on what they said and are achieving growth, have turned down 5 or 6 investors each for their C rounds or their growth rounds. So, seed is an easier part, A is a hard part, B is torturous, C is heaven. So think through all of these things if you really, really want to be a big company. A couple of other pointers on fundraising. Don't get too practiced in your pitch. You are going to be entering into a conversation. And if you go to one of these VC meetings and somebody said, how did the meeting go? And you said, well, we talked. They seemed to listen. A few people were on, other devices. While we were talking, they didn't have a lot of questions, so I think it went well. It did not go well. It means that this is not like American Idol. My mom passed away this spring, and my mom never really understood what a venture capitalist was, let alone what a software entrepreneur was, until Shark Tank came on TV. And she was pretty sure that that's exactly what I did. So I sat there with my partners. People came in, and we sort of randomly offered them different proposals, or we offered them nothing. And she so much enjoyed Shark Tank that I let her operate under that illusion until she passed away. But in some ways, it's more like Shark Tank than not. We don't give you proposals at the meeting. We like to say that if you don't capture our attention in the first 5 minutes, you're probably not going to get funding. And that means that, someone's going to ask you something. It means also if you have team members along, they don't sit there like dead people while you do all the talking, because we also want to see how you operate as a team. You want to have a conversation and engage. Now, sometimes, I remember when the guys from Cisco came in and gave us their pitch about software-defined networking. These guys are so wickedly smart. We didn't have a lot of questions. We thought, oh my God, these guys are really sharp. If we're going to fund any software-defined networking company, we're funding these guys. And then, they were really great. And each of them is a different nationality background. So every time one of them spoke, we had to sort of rewire our brains to, their different speaking style and what they were saying. And finally one of us said, look, we have a lot of questions, but we're afraid to ask them because we might sound, not as smart as you guys. That was a good meeting, and they did get funding. But, you really want to be prepared to be authentic. We want to know, again, back to the socializing, we can get your pitches right away. There's probably, if you're coming into a full partnership, one of the partners has really briefed everybody on what you're going to say. So they already know what the pitch is. We just want to see, do we want to fund you and your team? That is a decision that's being made there. If you get in front of a full partnership, somebody has already decided this is a really good candidate for funding. And so you need to be really authentic. If somebody says, hey, question XYZ, and you don't know the answer, you should say, that's a really interesting question. I actually don't know the answer to that. And, or to say, to really sort of engage, with these investors. we also want, we might ask really hard questions just to see whether you wither on the vine, or, some partners try to be, actually kind of mean during partnership meetings, just not, my partners aren't, well, maybe John Hummer occasionally, but he's 6'10", so he sounds big when he talks. Just to see how you're going to hold up under fire. It's all about you and your team and investing in people at that point in time. When you have your first meeting with the associate or partner one-on-one, that's where you're being sort of saying, is this one that we're going to bring to 2 partners next, and then maybe 4 partners, and then maybe the whole partnership. So I'm going to kind of stop there because I talked for about 22 minutes, I think, and we're going to open it to some questions.
How do you feel about pay-to-pitch type of environments for seed and angel investing? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think there are better opportunities than pay-to-pitch. Although Under the Radar is very effective here in the Valley. I think it's still pretty effective, and that's pay-to-pitch. And they've done a really, really good job of screening. So I hate to generalize about that. For most of the pay-to-pitches, they're not that great, but there are a few that, for a moment in time are really great. All of them fade away after a while, and then there's the next big venue where people pitch. I'm quite fond of, AngelList and online, and really, working through that and using the, collective there on AngelList or Gust, so that you get posted, you get a chance to talk to a lot of people, you work the system there with other colleagues who are, also fishing for angel money. I think that technology can be your friend there. And I'm amazed how many people go to the old-fashioned dinner clubs, which, never really worked, versus leveraging some of the newer technology platforms like AngelList and Gust.
Can you talk about, so I thought it was interesting how you mentioned seed and how that is ideal for certain, that's geared more for product, maybe smaller, they're looking for smaller exits, and the difference between that and VC, which is the visionary, and yet 8 out of 10 are professionally seeded. And so can you talk about strategies to successfully manage the seed round of having those advisors on board, but not setting you up to fail for the VC funding?
Well, I think, what I said is in general, 8 out of 10 are not professionally seeded in the U.S. I mean, there were 46,000 companies that received seed
I misheard that then. Okay, that makes sense.
So, that it really makes a difference. How are you or are you not going to get value or just money from your seed investors? If you can get money plus value, that's always way better. If we view ourselves as kind of a rubber wall for our companies where they can bounce ideas off of us, that we're living in a bigger pond, we're seeing multiple movies where we can share best practices with you, we can share colleagues with you. The professional angels will do pretty much the same thing while giving you a smaller amount of money. So I always believe money with value is better than just money. And money with value, as long as you tell people what your goal line is, the people that are doing money with value, have a lot of money. So, they like small outcomes, but they also like being part of these bigger deals. Now, general seed money is generally smaller money, generally smaller value, and generally smaller outcomes as a result. So, you're kind of on your own with a little bit more money. That means probably your own advisor group, which shouldn't be big, may have more value than your investment group. So as setting a goal, I would set a goal of getting money with value even at the seed round. And money with the syndicate, that if you get one part of the syndicate, and you can see these syndicates, how they formed on Gust and AngelList, how would you get one of these special syndicates that usually does get an A round? where they're going to call us up and we will have worked with their previous companies, we will work with them in industry. We'll take that meeting no matter what, even if they say, hey, remember that guy that controlled brainwaves with networks, he's back, we'll take the meeting. If Diane Green calls me and says that guy's back, I'll take the meeting.
Yeah.
So, you're more in, you'll have more doors open for you, and most of those, what I'll call professional angels, really want to help you build, they're swinging for the fences, although they're investing for smaller outcomes, versus people who are investing for smaller outcomes and not swinging for the fences.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I'm from Seattle, and I haven't started the fundraising process yet. This is my second startup. And it's been years since I raised my previous angel round for my previous company, which was like some 7 years ago. So I wanted to ask you if I wanted to start from scratch, right, raising a seed round, what recommendations would you have? Where would I start? I know that AngelList didn't exist 7 years ago, and things have changed. So
yeah, I do think that in Seattle also you're very fortunate that you have all those Microsoft guys and Amazon guys and girls. So there are syndicates of angels up there.
But they're more B2B. They fund B2B startups, and since we are more B2C.
Right now, things are very episodic in venture capital land. We consider ourselves pattern matchers, but there is a herding instinct. So there is a predominance of interest right now in B2B. A year ago, the interest was we do all B2B. We don't do B2C. We did some about 15 years ago. Last year, we were the most boring people at cocktail parties because last year people were doing B2C. But Zynga didn't turn out that well. Facebook struggled in their IPO. Most of the B2C companies have taken a lot more money than expected. So the favorite companies now are B2B. Next year could be B2C again, or B2E, I don't know. And with some, last year also there was a big rush to fund educational software companies. Areas get overfunded fast, and then the venture capitalists and the angels move in mass to the next thing. So it's okay that you're against the grain, but it means you'll have to, when you said most of them are B2B, that means some are B2C. And so you have a bigger challenge ahead of you, especially in a smaller market. Recently there was a big conference. One of the best venture capital conferences was the Grow conference in Vancouver. So look a little further north too for angel investments, because Canada is really, really hot, and there's a lot of great angel investors that are drifting down from Vancouver into the Seattle area. So it means you're just going to have to hunt a little harder. And you should watch the kind of things that are getting funded, on AngelList and other places like that. Call up some of those entrepreneurs and say, congratulations on your funding. How hard was it? How did you find these B2C people? Use your community. I'm amazed how, self-reliance is not a good attribute as an entrepreneur. It's over there in that risk thing. You cannot be self-reliant. If people have described you as self-reliant, okay, that's fine. You have to be talking to everybody. You have to reach out to, the set theory of who you are. Other entrepreneurs that are being funded that are not competitive with you, but might have been chasing the same investors. Embrace them as colleagues, talk to them, learn from them fast. They might have turned down some money that, they can introduce you to. So again, some of the words we use to describe ourselves, and some of the ways we have become so successful as women do not serve us well as entrepreneurs, especially in finding money. Self-reliance is another one of those things. It's not about self, it's about teams, it's about community, it's about, it's about collaboration as quickly as possible. So that's what I would also do. Even if you see no B2C companies in Seattle that have gotten their A round, I would call them up. I would also, call up a venture capitalist that's doing B2C. Howard's Madrona.
Madrona,
Yeah, they're still doing B2C. That's a whole big venture fund. Is just say, look, I'm only going after seed money now. Who do you think are the best seed investors, that are bringing you deals for the A round? Start up a little higher, move downward. Resourceful, not self-reliant. And you know what? It's like everybody comes in and says they're a big data company now. I might be really excited about taking a meeting with a company that has small data. So just
People introduce themselves to me. I do big data, and I said, "What do you do with it?"
like, who doesn't?
That happens all the time.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah.
So my question is not about fundraising. Let's assume you were going to get your company from C to A to B, regardless of whether you got funding or not. And my big question is, how would you, as a woman particularly, what do you need to think about to get a company that's structure, size, power? Because why don't you see more women-run billion-dollar companies? Why are they co-founders? Why are prominent women in the Valley, Ivy League women at Facebook and Yahoo? Why aren't, you spoke about risk versus opportunity, about budgeting into 4 years. What ways of thinking can we cultivate as women to say, I will get my company from A to B regardless, this is how I will become able to do that?
Well, back to the pattern matching. If we look at the venture capital industry right now, 90% of the venture capitalists are male. A good chunk of them went to a small set of schools, Stanford, Harvard, or one of the other Ivies. Most of them have engineering degrees or a science degree if they're doing science, biotech investing or clean tech. Most of them have advanced degrees as well. And our job as a venture capitalist is to create deal flow. And we can't find great companies unless we see a lot of companies. And if you're a venture capitalist, you talk to people you can relate to. So most of these guys go back to their alma maters. They go back into the engineering departments. They go to their MBA cohorts and talk to them. It's a very sad situation now. Only about 28% of the computer science majors in the U.S. are women, so we can't find women programmers for our companies. We have to remake them out of at Girls Who Code or whatever. Only 25% of the MBA classes are women. So we're dealing with a small set of people. So we're going to be the minority for a long time here until the whole educational value chain changes. So there's not any magic, leading in that's going to happen and change things. Although I love Cheryl's book and I love Cheryl as well. She's a tremendous leader in the community and in her company. So we're going to be short of women for a long time in the tech industry. We're just not creating enough of ourselves, in both undergraduate degree choices or in seeking advanced degrees. So, our jobs are hard. So I think, for how women, most of the people that are running the companies today, if I look at the companies that we fund, about 70% of the companies we fund, we have to recruit a CEO because we're funding engineers. We're funding the people that created the original opportunity. Now, the likelihood that there are even some women in that set of founding engineers is low. So, two things. One of my CEOs is actually with Wendy today. They're both keynoting a conference in Atlanta, Gail Ennis. Gail has a master's degree in molecular biology, had a big job at BEA, was the chief marketing officer of Omniture. And when we funded the company that she's CEO of, they needed a CEO. And Gail at Omniture was acquired for a few $1 billion by Adobe, and Gail decided not to stay. So I went to Gail and I said, "Hey Gail, why don't you look at this CEO job?" And she goes, "Well, I really never thought about being a CEO." I thought, "Oh, great, this is all I need." Should I describe Gail one more time? She's completely credentialed to be a CEO, but she didn't quite aspire to that next top. I mean, I think also that for all of us, it's sort of, where can we do the best job, and then where should we not get stuck, and where should we aspire? But we're small in number, and we're going to be small in number in Scotland, where they have all of these schools of informatics. Only 12% of computer science classes are now women. So you go to the UK, it's even worse. The CEO of Burberry is a woman from Minnesota, by the way. So maybe come from Minnesota helps. But I think the best thing that you can do is actually, in hiring, is never underhire. Never leave a spot open unless, if you can't find the right person, do not fill it. Our best CEOs, who really do the best job, and most people end up doing more than one company, because most companies do not go public. The best companies, get acquisition offers, and then they have to decide, should I sell or go the distance? So our CEOs end up repeating, because they've learned a lot in the CEO role. But what we really learned about them is they can amass an army of unbelievably great people. And this is probably the biggest tip for all of you too. Hiring is probably the most important thing you can do. You should never hire alone. You should never trust your own personal instinct on who you should hire. If you have advisors, this is the primary thing you should use your advisors for. Send your top candidates to them. One of my best CEOs, we're hiring our 400 person in the company. He personally interviews every single hire in the company, whether it's the receptionist or the chief architect. That's something you need to get used to as well, is that talent is everything. And this is the way people shine, is hey, also people, your own weaknesses show up less, because you've hired great people. You know your weaknesses, you hire great people to surround you, you are even a better CEO. So when I think about mistakes and empowerment and whatever, it is hiring. It is women coming back to me saying, well, I shouldn't have hired that person, I compromised there. Well, why? And because you're interested in moving forward. You're interested in filling that spot, getting the job done, and just moving forward versus saying, I'm gonna live without that chair filled because I haven't found the absolute best person for the job. And I've also proven that I can get great talent. I can convince them that my opportunity and working with me is better than that opportunity over there and working with that person. Other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one comment and one question. So I agree with your people comment. You had said it's the person I'm investing in, it's socializing, it's getting to know them. When people call me as a job reference, I cut them off and I say, don't ask me if this person has experience. You have their resume. They've already done 10 interviews. And so I say, personality-wise, you'll love this person. They're outgoing, they're not a yes. The last person I got to help get a job with a great startup, and I just said, she's not a yes man. She's going to be strategic. She gets results, but you'll love her. She's fun. It's like, do you get along, right? And
yeah.
So it's a person.
And that's especially,
it's important.
Michelle makes a really big point. That's especially true right now because these job descriptions are just wacky.
Yes.
Nobody,
you can't do it all.
There's no old jobs anymore.
Right.
I mean, the jobs are all new. They're all sort of rewritten like, if you look at a marketing job, it says, must be able to write SQL scripts, code in HTML, and by the way, Ruby, and get extra points. That's a marketing job. People know perfectly well they will not find that person. But they want to find a person who's not going to be intimidated by that, by that job description. That okay, well, I my HTML5 skills are a little bad, but I can probably do that. That's not as hard as strategic thinking. And this is really what most companies are doing, is just hiring people that are super capable and can help figure out what needs to get done. Even when companies have 400 or 500 people, if you visit Facebook or have worked at Facebook or Google or any of the contemporary companies, you walk in those buildings and you are shocked by the chaos. It's it's like, what are these people doing? They're just kind of walking around. Oh, wait, there's a person sleeping over there. You know, I mean, you know, how does it assemble itself as a company? But amazingly, if you go to Google for, which you've gone to for a formal presentation, you walk through this chaos and clutter, and there's no feng shui.
One of my husband's clients.
Yeah,
They think it's out
and
there.
they are like precision warriors. You know, if they've got a customer in there or a client presentation. But that's what really life is like in a startup now, is people want to know that you can survive in, you know, in uncertainty, and sort of, here's all the things you could possibly do for this job. You're going to have to narrow it down to the most important.
Oh yeah, and the other question was about networking. It's a question I get asked a lot. They say, how do I hang out with VCs? How do I network? And so my dad had an advertising agency. So he took all his clients golfing and fishing, fancy fishing trips in Canada. I'm from Cleveland. And so did you ever like play golf, or did you just hang out? I mean, you just had friends. You met people in college, and your neighbors were.
Well, my dad was a high school basketball coach, so
Oh.
I played every sport that I could possibly try. Now, I was not good at any of those sports, so you know, I try to avoid golf outings.
Okay.
You know, especially if they're at famous golf courses.
Okay. Pebble Beach.
You know, the thing to remember about venture capitalists is that our success depends upon deal flow. And good venture capitalists really want to meet a few new people every week, even just to meet them. If there's, you know, and I give myself a quota of like 4. You know, where there's no agenda for the meeting, it's somebody that I wanted to meet, it's somebody that, you know, and sometimes these meetings are horrible, you know, but most of the time they're really interesting. Because if I don't meet new people, I'm not going to get great deal flow. Now we're our firm, and everybody in our firm does that. So there are more open doors than you would suspect in venture capital. There is a lot of impatience from the part of the entrepreneur. You know, sending a note and thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to get an answer like in 10 minutes. And, you know, so, you know, I review my calendar with my assistant once a week. So, you know, if you sent me this on Monday, I do calendar reviews on Monday. You know, you're not going to hear from me for 8 days. You know, and maybe, hey, Ann's calendar's pretty busy this next month, or hey, she's got a spot next week. So, you know, I think, so just putting yourself out there. Also really looking at these venture capital websites and say, have they ever funded anything that's, you know, down my bowling alley? You know, it's shocking, you know, where people don't do that. You know, or they walk in and say, you know, hey, and they say, look, do you realize, you know, have you ever heard of this company? Oh yeah, they're a direct competitor. Well, we have $10 million in that company.
Right.
So, you know, do your homework. But there's a lot of venture capitalists here, and you know, a lot of really interesting people for you to meet, and they're never short of opinions. And you know, you'll gather facts before you get out there on the fundraising trail, or before you craft your pitch. You know, nobody would. This is the silliest thing to me, how people craft these pitches before they've ever pitched to ever even talked about the deal to anyone. You know, back to your father was in advertising. They did test marketing. Call it test marketing if you want to call it something else. Go out and feel. Is there any interest at all? You know, you're worried that the whole Seattle market has gone B2B. Okay, that's a good worry to have, but we're going to move you from the risk element to the opportunity element, and you're going to go find those B2C people and say, hey, who's left? Who's interested in this stuff? You know, you don't want to try to beat a door down of someone who might not be interested. And actually, who relates to me? Who thinks, wow, you know, you'd be amazed how many times we go back to our partners meeting on Mondays and you know, in the chit chat before we actually get down to business. Somebody will say, hey, I met this really interesting person this week. I'm not sure what they're going to come up with, but they were really smart, or they were really interesting, or they were really something. So then your name is echoed through the whole venture capital thing. So it's really not that hard. It just requires some patience and allowing yourself enough runway to do this. You know, it's not get a good pitch together and then race to get funding. This takes a while. When our companies go out to raise their B rounds, we have them do that over a 6-month period. And they're already funded.
You started your own venture fund in the late 80s when you were the exception and you have a male partner. I would assume maybe some of the women here will want to have a male partner for that pattern matching that you're referring to. How did you hook up with Hummer?
Well, after I sold my software company in Minneapolis and came out here to Endless Summer, Bull Ring Toasted, I was a little tired having done a startup for 5 years. And so I was going to take 6 months off, and I agreed with a publisher to write a technical book. And so I was working on that. And then venture capitalists started calling me up and saying, hey, we funded this software company and something's wrong, but we don't know what it is. Could you go look at it? I said, okay, that sounds fun. You know, I'll go do that. Well, after looking at about 50 of these things, it was kind of sad because I would have to be the bearer of bad tidings because most of them were funding software companies for the first time. And then the venture capitalists kept calling, and I said, no, I don't really want to do this. I feel bad, you know, some of these are really broken. You don't call me up if there's a good one and say, how can it grow? You call me up and say, this thing is falling apart. We don't know what's happening, you know, whether it's got, you know, some bad disease or, you know, they never wrote the code. And so I'm tired of being, you know, Nancy the nurse and, you know, and telling you how these companies are ill. And but this one guy said to me, hey, Ann, if you ever start another company, I know you did a company without venture capital, but you're going to raise venture capital. Because the era of, you know, starting companies by just starting them and selling the stuff is over. And you're going to need money to be on the competitive playing field. So I think you should cash in as many chits as you can, you know, well, everybody's calling you up. I thought, well, at least he explained it to me. And that made sense. So I went to see this one company, and they said, we have 26 companies in the hospitality industry, and they're all the top hotels, and all of them are calling us saying the software stopped working, and we can't figure it out. And we have our team in here, and they're not telling us. So I went to the VP of engineering. How many people here are programmers or have been programmers? Oh, a lot. So you'll get this story right away. And I said, you know, I'd like to see the source code. And the guy said, no. And I said, you know, guess what? You don't get no as an answer because I'm the inspector general right now. So hand over the source code. And he goes, we can't. And I go, you lost it? Did it evaporate? I mean, you know, are you starting to write the code over from scratch for all, you know? And he goes, well, it's actually kind of worse than that. He goes, we started writing the first version, and then the sales guy sold it to this hotel. So we did a bunch of features and functions to finish it off for that hotel, and then we went back to the drawing board, but then he sold another one, and then we spun that one over here. So we have 26 different sets of source code that, and I said, well, how much overlap is there? And he goes, about 10%. Because we keep selling this stuff, and now when it breaks, because we don't have any common code, you know, it's kind of a nightmare. And so I said, well, who knows about this? And he said, the VP of sales. I said, well, what about the CEO? And he goes, he hasn't figured it out yet. But you'd be amazed what can happen at companies. This company had about 12 million in revenue. And like the Four Seasons was running the front desk code, and you know, really great hotels of the St. Regis because they'd gotten the cream of the crop. And so everybody felt good about this until it started breaking. So I decided that rather than, you know, that I would go directly to the board member, and John Hummer was on that board, and say, look, you know, this is, you know, there's a whole bunch of software companies. There's a small set of commercial software companies. At that point in time, remember Microsoft went public in '85, and they went public off of 75 million in revenues, and the next year was the first time a software company, 2006 hit 100 million in revenue. So the industry was really small in 1988, the year we're talking here. And most people were doing custom code, and that most people did not know how to build a software company with solid commercial code that could scale to, you know, thousands of users. So this mistake was common. I told them that, and they had an acquisition offer for the company that they were debating. So John, I sat in at the board meeting, and John said, look, we're going to tell the acquirer the truth, because they really want the customers, and this will make it easier for them to put their own software in there versus ours. As the engineer said, it'll take us 2 years to redo the software from scratch and get it on an even playing field. And of course, John thought I was brilliant and started stalking me. And I had no interest, after visiting now 51 companies, to be a venture capitalist. I thought venture capitalists were the stupidest people on earth. Software. I thought, how could they not know? You know, how could you not know this? But they weren't. These were their first software investments. You know, I would have been the same kind of investor in a semiconductor company or a biotech company. You know, so, you know, it does help that you have practitioners investing in companies where they have some knowledge of success models and failure models. So, you know, John stalked me for a year while I was doing some consulting work and writing this book, and finally he convinced me to start the firm with him by saying, look, if you don't do this, I will be the first, I'll do it with someone else, it'll be a guy, and we'll be the first fund focused exclusively on software, and that if you ever want to be a venture capitalist, we'll ruin it for you. So he got my psyche, like, hey, if you think we've screwed up, you can help, you know, make the venture capital industry more interesting for software. And of course now, this last year, about 60% of all the funding was in software companies, so it's not, you know, being a software investor is not a unique thing anymore.
It's kind of like a marriage, though, your relationship with your partner. Would you feel comfortable expanding on how that's gone over the years?
You know, it's venture firms themselves are very complicated organizations because they're small. You know, there's only 5 senior partners that excel, and they run billions of dollars. And you know each other way too well. You know, you dread your partner's bad points, and you love their good points. It's like working in a small startup of, you know, 10 people your entire life. So, you know, the proof is in results, not in, you know, someday. You know exactly when your partner's going to be it. Your business partners, all 5 of your senior partners are not in decision mode. You know, oh shoot, this is the day we need to make a decision on my company, and they're all in a bad mood. I mean, you just know. There's too much you know about each other. But you also know how to get things done, which is great. And you really do know how to row the oars together. You know, but it's a lot of closeness to be in a small firm. And when I sold my software company, we had 150 people, which is not that big. But you know, it wasn't like you had, you know, the personas of 5 people around you at all times. So I would say that most venture capital firms are as functional and dysfunctional as families, as you described. Yeah.
I have a question. So 2 questions in fact. So have you invested in solo founders? You know, people keep warning me about being a solo founder. They're like, you know, you need to find a partner in the domain.
No.
No, okay.
In fact, we did find one solo founder, a guy named Joe Gatto. And Joe ended up selling his company for $100+ million to Thomson Reuters. And we met Joe in actually the same day that I met the guy who was controlling networks with brainwaves. So there was Joe and that guy. And, you know, Joe clearly had a brilliant idea. He was a single founder. And we went out before we funded him and helped found him a co-founder. We had a company that had been recently acquired, and there was this other brilliant guy there who we thought, oh, Joe will love him, and if they do. But, you know, we would never fund a single founder as an A round.
Yeah, I've been arguing that, you know, Jeff Bezos is a solo founder, and so was, you know,
Well, he's a solo
master
founder, but
designer.
he had team members when
Yes.
he sought funding. It's okay to have one founder, but you can't come to us alone.
Okay.
You have to come to
With
us
a
having
team.
given out equity to someone else.
Okay.
You know, if you want control, you should not take funding from anybody because you will not have control. You have stakeholders, you know, and founders that seek control. You know, Jeff is, you know, one of the smartest guys on the planet. He's a very top manager because he knows all details and can dive down. Some people would call him a micromanager. But he has people want to work for him. He hires great talent. You know, he is a big shareholder in his company, but he doesn't control it. And you know, we need to know that you can work with all these stakeholders, including investors, customers, employees, and other common shareholders as well.
Yes, so you give out equity to all these guys, but you're still like the founder, the person who founded the company, right? So
But
you have
there-
a team
there-
of people.
There is no job called founder.
Okay.
That's just something that is history as soon as you take the money. So this is also a misnomer where people think founders get special treatment. They don't. You know, once a company starts operating, there's a CEO who may or may not be the founder. You know, there's other jobs that may or may not be the founder. There's board seats that may or may not include the founder. So there is no role in a company called founder. It's on your bio somewhere that you were the founder. But we're much more interested in the role. And a good venture capitalist will try to make an assessment, you know, even before funding, whether they think you can scale into even the role of CEO. We would tell you. You know, if we thought you could be the CEO, we'd say, look, you know, are you prepared to be the CEO? And if you're hesitant, we're going, oh no, we want her to be the CEO. If we don't think you're going to scale because of other things we've learned about you, you know, we'll tell you. We say, look, you know, we'll fund you, but we think we're going to have to, as part of that A round, find a CEO, and you'll be reporting to that CEO. And you know, if you hesitate or don't want to do that or don't want to take our money as a result, that's fine. But we try to be really honest there, and we're, you know, it's a guess, but we have to decide that early on, because CEOs only join companies when you've got money in the bank, if we're trying to recruit one.
We have time for one more quickie.
You mentioned that 90% of the venture capitalists were from a small handful of schools, and to be taken seriously among your business, there's so many incubators and accelerators and now women's groups that are amazing support. I just want to get your take on that, because when you go to fund a company and be taken seriously, if you're not from that handful of schools, it's a little bit harder to get into, and a woman in this branch. So I was just wondering, would it be worth it to do accelerator incubators, or just try to go back to Stanford and go back to school and do something and meet a network to prove yourself, because you're trying to sell yourself and your company to get funding?
All right, that's a very high risk vocabulary.
Which is about networking.
You know, I think you just have to be yourself. I went to the University of St. Thomas. Most people think I went to school in the Caribbean, but I didn't spend you know, I said, gee, yeah, maybe I'd be more tan if I went there. But you know, so I have none of the credentials. You know, I have a technical degree and I have an advanced degree, and I once was a programmer. So I could check a few of the boxes, but you know, I don't check the gender box, right? And I certainly don't check the pedigree. It's interesting because I went to one of the Stanford class reunions with Heidi years ago, and everybody was, you know, reminded me of things we did together in our class. And Tim Draper recently published in my Facebook thing that, you know, we should connect on the Harvard thing because I went to Harvard. So, you know, I've achieved Harvard-Stanford status.
Yeah, actually, that's happened to me a couple times. They're like, oh, go talk to Michelle about the Harvard MBA. They told the IBM. I said, wow, that's great.
You know, the reason you would want to go back to get an MBA should have nothing to do with funding. You know, that would be a separate conversation from everything you strung together in those words. You know, I do think that, you know, an MBA is great for a lot of young women, especially if you went to a smaller school, and you can't leverage your previous cohorts. You know, you don't have a network. You're just kind of alone. You're the outlier from that. You I'm sort of one of the outliers from St. Thomas in my era, not anymore, because I've helped the school develop a school for entrepreneurship, etc. So, it's about you. Do you think it would be better for you to go get a master's, get in a Silicon Valley cohort by getting that master's at Haas or whatever? It's not about achieving funding. It's really about, preparing you for your own future. If you're sitting there and saying, I just have no one to network with, call somebody at, Luther College in Iowa and talk about, how was the corn crop this year. And, that's interesting, but it's not, I'm not getting enough collaboration to get going. And I think that's a valuable reason for a lot of people to get MBAs. Also, if you feel like, you really can't get your arms around some of the aspects of the business and you would like to have more of a leadership role, the schools here are amazing because all the entrepreneurs are in the classroom. Which the further towards the middle of the country you get, there's a lot of great entrepreneurs, but not the density. So we don't see them. But I would separate those two things. I don't, on any resume, I never look at what school people went to at all. I'm really looking at, what they've done, how they're sort of charging ahead, what their core competencies they would bring to a company, and how good of an aggressive lifelong learner they are. I mean, do they have the intellectual stamina to handle a startup and the intellectual capacity to do kind of amorphous jobs?
Thank you.